I don't know if you've noticed, but the world is getting worse. More and more people are ending up in prison, and in most cases receive body modifications to either aid in their new work, or at worst, subjugate them further. You are one such person, whose body has been modified to such an intense degree that the only actions you can perform, the only actions you're allowed to perform, is walk and cook. So make me an egg, cooked on both sides, as always. Arctic Eggs is a strange game in almost every respect. True to that original guard's words, all you can do is cook and move around, but the way these verbs are represented is tonally interesting. There are a few games that handle like Arctic Eggs. Your task is simply to cook food for the denizens of the city, but you go about that task with a control scheme that is deeply finicky and precise. Moving your mouse in any direction tilts the pan the same way, with constant motion necessary for the meats to properly cook. And of course you gotta get that flip going. There is a steep difficulty curve to this motion, which the game refuses to compromise on. The difficulty setting just changes the shape of your pan, and nothing else. If you want to play Arctic Eggs, you will need to figure out how to flip an egg. This control scheme would feel right at home on a motion controller, but on the mouse, it almost feels like playing one of those YouTuber rage games like Surgeon Simulator, QWOP, Getting Over It, and the like. Silly physics games are deliberately hard to control for audience amusement. But unlike those games, Arctic Eggs makes it a point to celebrate your successes and never stress your failures. The game does want you to succeed. As you move about the city, you aren't just a cook for the populace, but also a confidant and entertainer. What starts as a purely eggs and bacon affair quickly becomes a game of balancing bottles of beer, watching the military police throw bullets into the mix, perhaps throw your egg out of the pan, bouncy and flippy fish food, and my personal least favorite, cockroaches. You entertain the people by putting on a little show for them while you cook, but your role as confidant is where the real meat of the game lies. Perhaps it's because of your inability to speak, but people easily open up to you, tell you their thoughts, their fears, and their weird inner lives. As I said at the beginning, the world is getting worse. We don't know much about Egg's setting. It's all delivered through character monologues or musings, and of course the lore fish, which we'll talk about in a bit. All we know is that life is hard. Food seems to be scarce, as most conversations surround food, its preparation, if they like cooking at all, how they feel about certain ingredients, the ever-present question that becomes a philosophical exercise for the characters: can you fry an egg atop Mount Everest? There's an overall strong fascination with eggs and poultry, as the person in charge of this area, the Saint of Six Stomachs, recently banned the consumption of poultry. That, coupled with the Saint no longer eating rays as he used to, and the whole city is in upheaval as the status quo shifts once again. One more food source off the table. The police aggressively enforce this mandate, and the prison area shows the severity of punishment for the crime of keeping a chicken or talking badly about the Saint. As this prisoner so helpfully points out, you're not much better off yourself. Remember, your whole body has been modified for the exclusive purpose of walking and cooking. You probably look worse than these guys. Make no mistake, this is an authoritarian state, and the people living here are suffering, but that is not the focal point of the narrative. As you move throughout the world, you will instead see people just living their lives. Police and citizens alike, caught up in their own worlds, sometimes trying to escape it all, sometimes making jokes about their plight, but usually blissfully unaware that literally anything in the world is off. We humans are so good at normalizing odd or immoral actions, behaviors, decisions, or even greater shifts in society. Time is just too long for people to keep it straight. 20 years ago, it was 1 degree Fahrenheit colder across the world on average. 40 years ago, we all knew that Nazis were the bad guys. But time marches on. And if you aren't paying attention, time will take away what you once took for granted. Well, that's not quite true. The Saint of Six Stomachs is the one responsible for these changes, not time itself. But time shields him from criticism. It will make you forget that things were ever different. Very few in the game remember the flamingos, but they were once here. And we only know about them now because of these stories. These wistful memories of a better time back there are now all that exists of these weird birds. Overall, Arctic Eggs is a bit of a messy game, and intentionally so. The creatures, human or otherwise, pulse and throb when you talk to them. The dialogue is delivered through text that writes itself on screen, and sometimes there are little errors that need to be erased and retyped out. That's one of my favorite touches. The odd visual glitch gags as well. There's something very human about how messy people are in this game. From the words they speak, the mistakes they make in talking or moving, Even the janky controls contribute to this feeling of messiness. It's best illustrated with the pandering resembles erosion dialogue. This game is goopy, sticky, kinda nasty to look at, and hard to play on top of it all. But then there are these great moments made better through struggling to obtain them. Like a runner's high, that great feeling only comes after great effort. A guard pondering how calling someone a chicken has gone from an insult to a compliment. Being a chicken means they're desired, beloved even. The conversation with the old man continues to haunt me to this day because it's an exploration of what it means to get old, how your body starts to fail you, and you start to need aids to do things that you 10, 20, 30 years ago would have been able to do just fine, and how it's alienating. Alienating from yourself, but also from existence itself. I don't know what that feels like, but putting it in this cyberpunk lens made it more understandable to me, and honestly a little bit terrifying. These moments of introspection, humor, and good writing are moments the games want you to fight for, to get through the jank and the gross, to see those highest peaks. One moment that refuses to leave my head is this fish on a lone table in the market, where stabbing it reveals the only piece of lore in the game. Something about the act of gutting this fish, turning it from life to food. This is how you connect to the world. The world speaks to us through this act, and communing with the food chain, you can take in some of the fundamental truths of the universe. The Saint of Six Stomachs can't do that, and neither can any of the guards. This is at most a 15-second sequence, but it says so much in so little time. It is the people at the bottom, the reapers, the farmers, who kill and cultivate and work the land for the survival of our species, who are the closest to the world soul. And also some of the most powerless. Though very challenging, you don't need to complete everything to beat the game, so it's forgiving in a sense. If something proves far too difficult for you, skip it and try something else, and you'll more than likely still complete enough tasks to see the credits. Looking back on the script, I have the least to say about Arctic Eggs compared to what's to come, but that is not a knock against its quality or enjoyment. It's simply the shortest of these 3 games, but I really do love it, and maybe you will too. I recommend this game to anyone looking for something odd, quirky, thoughtful, funny, and definitely janky. Arctic Eggs takes place in a dystopian, frigid cityscape, where people spend their days thinking almost exclusively about food under the authoritarian thumb of a man defined by his ability to eat. It's a meager existence, but you can't change it. You can only walk and cook. So you do. The world is doomed. In a city off the north coast of New Zealand, terrifyingly large monsters called kaiju are appearing in force, and though humanity is trying its best to contain the threat, nothing has meaningfully stopped their approach. The kaiju are coming to destroy the world, but you weren't born with the true grit to be a mech pilot or policeman, but a photographer, taking pictures of what will end up being humanity's final days on Earth. Umurangi Generation is a game that knocked me flat on my ass when I first finished it because of how well it breathes life into its levels and greater setting. Each level is a small zone, whether that be a skyscraper's roof or a collection of streets, and you are tasked with taking pictures of various requests in that zone and turning them in under the time limit. There is a huge variance to these requests, from take a picture of 7 birds to close-ups of words like cop or boomer, or really specific things like 5 American flags with a particular lens. These requests encourage you to carefully observe the environment so you can complete the level, but they also allow Umurangi Generation to jam-pack their levels with environmental storytelling. As an example, let's walk through the first level of the game, Mau View. And by the way, the game uses a lot of words from Maori, the language of the indigenous people of New Zealand. I promise I'm trying, but I apologize if I mess up any pronunciations. Mau View takes place on the roof of a skyscraper that you and your friends have decked out with all sorts of art, music, and couches for hanging. Here are your picture requirements for the level, the stuff the game explicitly forces you to notice. 2 markers and 2 boomboxes both show that you and your mates are artists, who have made this place theirs and coated it with the tools for playing and making art. A Union Jack, which pairs well with the later request, the Mountain Mauau. These establish the setting. You are in New Zealand, a country with a proud indigenous culture, but like a lot of the world, was and is a victim of colonial powers, specifically the British Empire, gaining independence from Britain in 1947, though recent news should well demonstrate how the past could still eat the future. What was it that Lindsay Ellis said? The legacy of colonialism is baked into every facet of every culture on the planet? The powers that be didn't stop being a problem in 1947, though we're getting ahead of ourselves. The 7 birds task reinforces the fact that you're up high, a simple task for a simple purpose. The disposable camera is an interesting task, given that you have a pretty serious camera in your hands. Perhaps some of your friends like taking pictures for sentimental reasons? I mean, you're being paid to take pictures with your camera, and a disposable camera doesn't have remotely the same level of features, so maybe your camera's a newer thing? Who knows? And finally, the word mix, which is a tricky one. Mix doesn't actually appear anywhere in the level, but mixed does in this graffiti. I am just a kid in this mixed up world. Revealing the headspace of you and your mates. You're all young and feel like something's wrong with society. And there is. In the first level, the player's not necessarily aware of the kaiju, but the in-universe characters are, and this is your first hint that something is amiss. But it's also just as possible that you would see this and go, yep, because you're a human living in the world that we live in, and this sentiment works just as well in our world, doesn't it? There are further objectives that are the same for every level. Get a photo with all your friends, find the postcard location and take the photo as shown on the pause screen, and find all the film canisters. Each of these tasks encourages you to try new angles and lenses to get the shots you need. Can you fit all of your mates into the one shot? And yes, the penguin is included. It is a very good beast. It deserves to have its photo taken. The film canisters, along with the generic earn a certain amount of money tasks, are there to encourage you to dig deeper into the level. Take pictures that excite you or have interesting action, scenes you find notable. And in so doing, you may find extra details that further flesh out this world. The sign that says you're trespassing, which you're currently violating and must have violated tens of times in order to have a hangout pad this elaborate. Why isn't this being enforced? Could it have anything to do with the giant shell casings peppering the tops of this building? What could have fired these? And how could they have landed here? The cases say they're the property of the UN. And speaking of, there's a massive dam between the city and the ocean, which is labeled UN as well. Perhaps we're in the middle of a climate catastrophe, with the ocean levels rising? Or it's the kaiju. There's a drawing of one behind your friends, which crudely demonstrates the scale of the monsters against the eensy-weensy mountains in the background. This kaiju is depicted mid-death as an equally gargantuan gun blows its head off, the shells ejecting above the weapon. Perhaps those are the same as the shells we found earlier? This art is signed by Keat, and there's more art nearby signed by Nikki. So now we have 2 names to these faces. All this information without a word of dialogue, just a couple of picture requests, and your own curiosity drives you to learn about this world. In terms of environmental storytelling, few games are as dense as Umurangi Generation, and it's interesting what moments you're ordered to immortalize in photo and what is ignored. It makes me wonder who's making these requests. The final task of every level is to deliver the photos under the time limit, which is always 10 minutes, but don't let that stress you out. You can spend as much time in these levels as you would like. If you're of a completionist mindset, then you'll eventually need to take on all these tasks under that time limit, but that's not something you should shoot for on your first attempt. Just consider the timer a gentle guide for when you should be moving along, and perhaps take it more seriously on later attempts if you're interested. And if you're extremely disinterested, you can even turn the timer off in the settings, like I eventually did. This doesn't get rid of the completion requirement, but it removes that UI element if it's not something you care about. Your reward for completing each level is new lenses and features for your camera, allowing you to further customize your photos and shots, as well as adding lens requirements to your photos, encouraging even more dynamic framing. And that's kind of the gist of the gameplay experience. You walk around these immersive levels rich with details to capture and complete your tasks with the help of your camera, which tries very hard to faithfully represent all the intricate tricks you can pull off with a genuine DSLR camera in this game space. It's a great game, and if you stick close to that time limit, you can beat it within 2 hours, so I absolutely recommend it to anyone who's interested. And also, you should step off here and play this game now if you want to do that, because past this, I'm gonna get real spoilery. Umurangi Generation tells its story in 2 parts. There's the main game, which demonstrates the end of the world through the eyes of those powerless to stop it, and the DLC, which explores why you are so powerless in the first place. The first few levels demonstrate the status quo in this near-future New Zealand. Your aforementioned hangout spot, followed by a military compound where they prepare for your classical alien invasion sort of deal with targets and combat simulations. Feels like something out of Independence Day, the way these soldiers are almost excited for combat. An undercity thick with smog, covered in memorials of a figure that sacrificed themselves to save others from the kaiju threat, and even further memorials past that. An area used to loss, contrasting with a bustling entertainment district where people create art. Some art keenly aware of the injustice of their time, and others living in spite of that, perhaps in denial of their end. These previous two levels are different forms of coping with tragedy, until even greater tragedy arrives. You return to the military compound to find the place devastated. The kaiju are here, and their assault was quick and deadly. As for your crew, some of your friends assist the wounded or are ready to fight, and your job, as always, is to take your pictures. This is probably the most dissonant level in the game to play, because of the active death around you. The lower floors of the compound that you were free to traverse before are now lost, and the people with them. And your friends are trying their best to aid in this dire situation, but you simply record it. You catalog the horrors of the moment, the suffering, the death, for others to consume, so that someone somewhere else who's never had to fear that their life would end by a bomb in the ground or starvation, or in this case, a gargantuan monster, can try to imagine what it would be like if they did have those worries. It's uncomfortable that I can't help. None of my gameplay verbs involve healing or harming. It's just recording. I am a ghost, placed here to witness suffering. I have to imagine this feeling somewhat mirrors the anguish felt by war photographers, a type of work well known for the mental toll it takes on its disciples. The survivor's guilt of literally witnessing horrors that you are not permitted to change in any way. This level is the closest I've ever been to that feeling, and I'm certain that it doesn't even come close to the real thing. The last train to safety and a refugee camp in the train station make up the next two levels as you reconvene with the citizens of the city, now forever refugees. Even in these dark, hopeless moments, you can see people trying to stay busy, stay engaged, not falling to the hopelessness of their plight. As I said before, the human mind is very good at normalizing its predicament, but I appreciate how all of Umurangi Generation, and the other games in this video, demonstrate the small moments lost in the big ones. It's easy to think of history, past and future, as a collection of impactful moments, that this world will end as a violent and immediate that destroys everything. Hell, we love making stories where the world ends in just such a climactic boom. Think about the sudden apocalyptic climate collapse of movies like 2012 or Day After Tomorrow, or to return to games, the Great War in Fallout. By some accounts, the Great War lasted all but 2 hours as each side sprayed the other with nuclear bombs, which you bear witness to in Fallout 4. And then, time passes, skip some stuff, it's all pretty boring honestly, and boom, now we're here, back to the good stuff, back to the part where you get to play the game. We construct history, even our own lives, as only the moments of consequence. But so much of life isn't consequential. There's a lot of waiting, a lot of doing nothing, just trying to pass the time with a game, with a ball, by counting the colors of cars or coats as they pass by. In the next and final level, where the mechs and kaiju square up in their climactic final fight, you are nowhere near it. You're back at your old hangout, with more people here this time, either refugees looking for a safe spot, or onlookers, catching a great view of the end of things. But you'll never see the kaiju or the mechs get any closer. Even at the end of the world, a second is still a second long. Umurangi Generation works hard to represent what people are really like through tragedy. When they're pushed, when they're broken, and when they're smiling despite it all, we're still human, even when the world is out to get us. Predictably, the UN's mechs cannot stop the kaiju, and somehow you're the last human left. You walk up to a kaiju towering over you, and you're left with one last task, one last picture to commemorate the moment. Humanity is over. Begin the reign of the kaiju. This is the original ending of Umurangi Generation, which, by the way, translates from the native Maori to Red Sky Generation, in reference to the color of the sky above New Zealand as Australia burned in 2020. A game about a group of people who were forced to witness the end of the world. You, the player, haven't done a damn thing to stop the kaiju. But what if you tried? Umurangi Generation's DLC, succinctly named Macro, explores the events 2 weeks prior to the beginning of the game. So, at best a month before the death of humanity. Each level has your photographer exploring the myriad perspectives of totalitarian injustice New Zealand suffered under its overseers, the United Nations. There are only 4 more levels, but Macro is even more dense than the base game in terms of environmental information, and the levels are larger to boot. You're most likely not going to make your 10-minute timer your first time playing these levels. I certainly didn't. Gamer's Palace demonstrates the UN's debauchery and self-deception, with soldiers partying without a care in the world, multiple monitors talking about how the kaiju aren't a big deal, and a debate furry that's kind of funny and awful at the same time. All the while, just outside, your friends huddle for safety as the kaiju rage somewhere in the city, the music drowned out by the walls of the club, and of course, the booms of the kaiju. UN Hangar is a military compound where mechs are being worked on. Your job is presumably to take pictures of these mechs to act as symbols of hope for humanity, or to put it another way, as the propaganda arm for a fascist regime's giant peacekeeping tools. But they're hiding something. A secret third mech that reveals just how dangerous the kaiju can be. Despite how stunning this revelation would be to the public, this is not one of your tasks. In fact, taking the picture of it at all can net you a penalty, depending on what's in frame. You're not told to take a picture of this because, well, we don't want to be seen as weak, do we? No, the UN are strong and powerful, and the kaiju are scum on our boots. We will drive those kaiju back to where they came from and make the world great again, believe you me, so don't worry the people with the truth. The Depths shows what happens to the outcast and useless in the UN's regime. They are abandoned, assumedly criminalized to the point of needing to hide in these sewers, whose waters are clearly not safe for humans, but the UN doesn't care about those people's safety. They care that dissidents stay quiet. Many amputees are found down here, which suggests to me that these are veterans. The people who gave part of their soul for the UN's mission now find themselves among the rats. Though the Rat Queen is currently doing more for them than those in power, those without must band together to survive, And finally, we arrive at the last level of Umurangi Generation, beneath Gate Pa. You and your friends are now wearing a completely different garb to protect from tear gas or batons, as you and various Kiwis protest the aggressive regime of the UN. You take your photos, not for some unknown beneficiary, not for money, but directly to social media, so that those who can't be here and further may bear witness to what happened here today. Perhaps for safety reasons, but also so the world can see what you're doing, so that in the future, no one can say you didn't fight. You take this protest to the foot of the monument commemorating a battle that happened here in 1864, where Maori soldiers fought off the British despite being massively outnumbered, a moment in history mirroring your present. But we all know how this must end. We are the Umurangi Generation, after all. The UN uses the overwhelming force of their mech to subjugate the protesters. Tear gas rains down, and the police do what the police do. Despite the devastation, you and your friends make it out alive and return to the surface, battered and broken. There is a lot to be said about this ending. You get the ability to take selfies right at the end, allowing you to finally know who is behind that camera. Usually your character is a ghost to the world, but here, in this level, she chooses to belong to this moment. This is who she is. These are the people and moments she chooses to be a part of. The mechs turning on the citizens is a terrifying thing to witness, but makes sense with the UN we've seen in Macro. We're used to seeing mechs as defenders, fighting against equally gargantuan foes like the kaiju or angels or other mechs, but rarely do we see a willingness to just use that power against the minuscule, to demonstrate your absolute will over the people. Mech anime come from a strong tradition of anti-war messages. They are giant, awful machines whose very existence is a condemnation of how lost we've come in the pursuit of war and power. But what are we supposed to do? Not use them? When our enemy is so heinous, our foes so gargantuan in their power and reach, can we ever stop ourselves from climbing back into the mech? Here is a natural extension of what the mechs can do if they were real. They defend us against monsters, machines, and foreign agents, but the thing they defend above all else is the status quo. Finally, the level ends with a damage report. Each bullet fired, the property damage, the loss of life, and the cost to cover it up. Look at the sheer number of weapons wielded, blood spilled, and dollars spent just to keep things the way they are. Not a dollar spent proactively, just reactively, for more of this. Those New Zealanders saw life getting worse and worse, and the UN chose to sell them lies, as well as new capitalist spins on our current hell, products to dull the pain of the present, a modern problems requires modern solutions mindset to make these new escalations seem normal. Sick of the earthquakes from the giant monsters coming to destroy everything? Soundproof your home, and similar such products. The UN and the free market tried so hard to preserve a status quo that was actively crumbling, and the Kiwis fought back, but it was too late to do anything. The overwhelming force couldn't be stopped, and the world would end no matter what you did. The Umurangi Generation. The generation who has to watch the world die because those above them wouldn't do a goddamn thing. The world has been dead and gone for a long, long time. You are Watcher, watching and being watched forwards and backwards through time as you try to perform your function, to observe the goings-on of your home and the All-Mother's life. And within seconds of turning on the game, you kill that All-Mother, Iris, for stealing your immunity. A violent act of resistance which you, the player, could not hope to understand in any way. Who am I? Who is she? What do these words mean? What happened that made this blue woman do this? And who is that behind me? You are dropped into a world utterly devoid of context as you commit what you will eventually realize is one of the most consequential acts in the world. And that is where we begin. 1,000 Times Resist is a very conceptual game, and has been called by multiple publications, YouTubers, and award shows over and over the best story of 2024. So if you haven't experienced it, you really should. But also, 1,000 Times Resist is a very dense and metaphorical text, so understand that going in. This is a roller coaster of a story, one where you're not going to pick up on everything on your first playthrough, and yet rewards careful attention and interest if you go for multiple playthroughs. That's one of this game's greatest strengths. It's easy to pick up, hard to master in a narrative sense, rewarding your continued interest in digging into it, which has a lot to do with how the narrative is structured. But before we get into that, I must also tell you that 1,000 Times Resist is a much different beast from the previous two games, owing a lot to its inspiration in books, movies, and games of a more narrative persuasion. As a result, 1,000 Times Resist is gameplay sparse. What gameplay does exist consists of exploring eclectic environments for hidden narrative nuggets, as well as providing narrative cohesion through the method you explore the world. It's very walking simulator in that way. The way you move through space is important to understanding the story, like how the 2D plane here represents the chronological order of events as you experience them, or moving back and forth through this house, which, while an incredibly small space, holds a lot of your childhood memories, so as you move through it, all sorts of memories backwards and forwards in time are experienced on top of each other, all inside of this terribly small zone. So much like Iris did as a child, you experience different things as you move all over this house. Every inch of the space is drenched in memory. But that's the bulk of the gameplay analysis I can give you. The story is definitely the star of this show. All that to say, I won't be doing a gameplay analysis as I have with the previous two games, at least not any further. And also, I won't be getting too specific in the hopes that what I say piques your interest, in the hopes that maybe you'll play the game. Not a lot of people have really gotten into this one, and more people should. So, if anything from the previous games interests you, you should also play 1,000 Times Resist. Honestly, I think everyone should. It sits right beside Signalis, in my mind, in the halls of very cerebral and winding, but beautiful game narratives. So I hope this next section proves alluring to you. And for those who have played the game and can see through the kind of windy way that I'm going to talk about it, buckle up because I have thoughts. This game takes place in 3 different worlds. The first world, and most alien to us, is Watcher's world, where a society of clones worships and carries out the will of the All-Mother. Watcher is one of the leaders of that society, but her job is different from the others. She doesn't have any maintenance tasks or service she offers. She just watches both the other sisters and the goings-on around their sacred grove, and the All-Mother's memories. in an effort to understand her and slowly unveil the secrets of that long-lost past. Iris's world, in a not-too-distant future to us now, where the child of Chinese refugees tries to acclimate to Canadian society and soon makes contact with an alien species known as the Occupants. From there, stuff happens. And finally, Clara's world, Hong Kong, China, during the 2019 protests against a bill that they feared would erode Hong Kong's legal sovereignty from the Chinese Communist Party, fears that would prove true. The protests failed to produce the changes desired by the protesters, Beijing got their way, and Hong Kong has had its voice effectively silenced in the years since. And Clara Kwan, along with her husband and Iris's eventual father, fled from Hong Kong due to their role in the protests. I describe these moments like this because that's the initial framing of each world. This is where these characters' hearts belong, but the lines between each aren't concrete. Clara is Iris's mother, so she's obviously here, and through means we don't understand, Iris is in Watcher's time too. But there's a lot that happens between these layers. Hell, the Watcher you play as isn't even the first of her kind, and her method of witnessing the past makes these lines even blurrier. Watcher communes with the Allmother, a sacred act where the user can experience the memories of Iris, her ancestors, and her descendants through her genetic memory. But because communion is a function of memory, it isn't too concerned with chronology. A smell may remind you of a different time or place, like how carpeted car interiors always brings me back to playing Pokemon Sapphire in 2004, Shania Twain playing in the back. And how an argument you're currently having reminds you of all of the other arguments you've had with this person. Even if those remembrances are only flashes in your mind, Watcher would witness that argument nearly in full. So communion throws you forward and back in time to moments potentially centuries apart, as the lightest connecting threads attach two moments in the Allmother's centuries-old mind, with Watcher witness to it all. It's very similar to the play experience of Immortality if you tried it out, and you should, by the way, that's also a very good game. This is the basic structure of Thousand Times Resist. You, the player, are dropped into a world with no context. You're not told where you are, who you are, or why every character looks the same. They say strange phrases and have a belief system that you have no understanding of, and then you are projected back in time to a world that's immediately more familiar to you. The communion may throw you all over the place chronologically, but each of these moments takes place in a world that's familiar to us, so there's comfort in the communion. Comfort for us, but notably not for Watcher. It's an interesting dichotomy between the player and the player character. What they need explained, you just understand because you belong to this culture. And the religious far future world of the player character isn't explained to you because Watcher is not an audience surrogate. She is visiting our world through communion, and we visit hers through 1,000 Times Resist. I believe this gameplay is meant to mirror the experience of trying to fit in and understand a place whose rules are entirely alien to you, mirroring the immigrant experience of Iris, her parents, and presumably the writers of this game. There is comfort to be found in the familiar memories of the past, and we experience the same through Watcher's communions, but it's important to remember that the past is in the past. Spend too much time reminiscing, and you won't be able to live here in the present, becoming a shell of yourself. Because time is out of whack in 1,000 Times Resist, the story is delivered as a puzzle for you to solve. A mystery box where we must discover why each character made the decisions they made to survive, or fight for what they believe in, or to escape a bad situation, and how those decisions affect other decisions forward in time. In fact, we usually learn the effect before the cause, which makes the narrative stronger than if we were just told what happens in chronological order. This chronological weirdness and learning effects before we ever find causes helps represent one of the central themes of 1,000 Times Resist: generational trauma. Children didn't ask to be born. They don't have an understanding of why the world is this way, and they often look to their parents for the answers. But parents are people too, just as flawed, just as prone to mistakes, and those mistakes can be passed on to their children. By Watcher's time, the mistakes of the past are deep, running through society and each of the clones, ignorant to the trauma they've internalized. So looking into that past gives us a glimpse into why the Allmother is this way, why Clara is this way, and it helps humanize the sins of the mother, even if they are still sins. The damage is done. leaving a mark that carries itself forward, a cycle that is hard to stop. Maybe even impossible to stop, but we must still try, which is another reoccurring theme. It may be impossible to break free from the past. We may be destined to make the same mistakes, but we must try to overcome them all the same. Perhaps Hong Kong never had a chance against the larger Chinese Communist Party, but no one can say they didn't try. There are similar notions behind this picture, which I'm not describing because YouTube would get real mad at me if it hasn't already. This is a hopeful moment, and what followed was a massacre, but because they stood up for what they believed in, we can't say they didn't exist. Iris perpetuated her damage on the world, as did Clara, and so does Watcher. Generational trauma is hard to overcome, but every one of them wanted to try, and the proof is in the children they carried. Having a child at all demonstrates a belief that things can get better, that the world is worth fighting for. So even after everything Clara lost, she believed that she could do better than her mother, and that the world could be made better through Iris being in it. And in a way, she was right. Themes are revisited over and over as you see how time's arrow led each character to their decisions and sets in motion a cycle of mistakes from some far-flung origin point. Themes of resistance, abandonment, motherhood, authoritarian rule, and more are examined and re-examined so consistently throughout this game's 11-hour runtime that I honestly just couldn't believe it. From the largest possible scale of people resisting God or government to some of the smallest, like brushing off a mother's nagging, the authority and the resistance are constantly changing frame and position, with some characters being on both sides at different points of their lives. Other characters, especially the clones, show us different embodiments of resistance, whether an inward refusal to repeat the language and become jaded, or an outward punk style of resistance. How authority co-opts resistance narratives and can even see itself as a form of resistance against some even higher power. How the marginalized fight back, either against their oppressors or sometimes against themselves in an attempt to be the model minority. And speaking of model minority, there are many, many themes and experiences in this game that are grounded in being Asian, some of which I've already touched on, like not understanding the cultural environment you now find yourself immersed in through the dichotomy between the player and watcher. But there's so much more to it than that I'm simply not equipped to talk about. In case you haven't noticed, I am a white man, Europe's all over my genetics, plus I was born in the Appalachian United States, and all of those things color my perception of the world, of art, and the experiences of others. 1,000 Times Resist is a game that's very much based in its Chinese roots, so while there are plenty of things to talk about within this game that are more universal to the human condition, I wouldn't be able to gab this long if that wasn't the case, there are plenty of more subtle themes that I simply didn't pick up on, because I don't speak the same cultural language. All of this to say, I am not the guy to talk about the Asian themes of this game, so if you're interested and want more information on the Asian themes, I will link an article below for that, as well as links to some YouTubers who are more capable of having this conversation. This game is very rooted in the traumas and experiences of Asian people, and specifically people from Hong Kong, though maybe that was obvious. So understand that it goes deeper than I am capable of conveying. A lot went over my head, and then I read this article and went, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I started putting all of the connections together because, you don't know what you don't know. It reminds me a lot of when the creator of Celeste told the public that Madeline is trans. That story has a lot of elements to it that make a lot of sense for trans people, but until it's pointed out, I'm not gonna see it. It's just not the first thing I'm going to think of. Representation is good. Anyway, these ideas swirl around the entirety of the game, and you are encouraged to drink deeply of these themes and come to your own conclusions. This isn't a game with branching paths. Watcher will do what Watcher wants to do, because as I've already illustrated, no one represents you in this story. Watcher is not an audience surrogate, so you are left to figure out the timeline and size up who you think is right and who's wrong, and what is the right way to resist. Do we change things just to change things, intentionally throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Or is there such a thing as going too far? In trying to make the world a better place, what would you do? Can you, the player, learn from all of this and truly break the cycle? Maybe you can, and maybe you can't. But you must act when the time is right. When the time is right. If only it was as easy as saying that. Do we ever really know when the best moment to act would be? It's only ever in hindsight. In the middle of this paralyzing, terrifying now, what consequences led us here, and how will the consequences of this reach the future? How do we know if now is the right moment to move? There is this old expression of immense historical importance: crossing the Rubicon, a reference to Caesar crossing that river on his way to retake Rome and forever bend it to his will, turning the Republic into the Roman Empire until its eventual fall. This expression, crossing the Rubicon, represents a point of no return. Following his governorship, Caesar was ordered to stay north of the Rubicon, and in crossing it, he demonstrated direct insubordination of the rule of law and changed history. But the thing is, the Rubicon isn't very big. It's 50 miles long and in some places as thin as 10 meters across. On a sturdy bridge, you can cross that distance in half a minute without ever seeing the water below. It's hard to tell, even as you are doing so, that you are currently crossing the Rubicon. Say, for the sake of argument, you are, at this moment, standing ankle deep in the water, desperately wondering how many paces you are from the south bank of the Rubicon. For the Umurangi generation, they were already across it. Nothing could be done to stop the ignorance of the United Nations, nor the end of the world. For Hong Kong, they were as well. And yet, 1,000 Times Resist says you should fight back anyway, because history isn't over at the crossing of the Rubicon. You may not be successful, and it may change you forever, but the world won't forget what you lost. The future will remember that you tried, and it may give them the strength to fight their own fights. And this time they may win. So resist. Resist for our children's future, so that they can resist themselves. Resist so those children have a choice to be what they want to be. 1,000 times over, resist, because we must never let monsters become our gods, nor become monsters ourselves. I choose to see Umurangi Generation as a warning rather than a sentence. Our world is not ending in a month, even if there are those out there who want you to feel that way. We're all still here, living our lives, and even if we really did only have a month left, a second is still a second long. And that's a month that we could use to try and make life better for everyone here for whatever time we have left. Each of these games shows us worlds that are dying, and how people respond to that. Arctic Eggs represents a world that is resigned to itself. People living out a meager existence, incapable of imagining something better. They dream of eggs on Mount Everest because that is their form of freedom. A mountain of what-ifs. A life free of the city. They can't imagine anything better. Their version of paradise is a desolate, frigid mountain peak. Umurangi Generation is fully past the Rubicon and is a bitter tale of what happens when you choose your moment too late. But 1,000 Times Resist says even failed revolutions are valorous and righteous because you stood up for what you believed in. And so history will remember that you didn't want this. So your children could survive and be a beautiful blossom of resistance all their own. I refuse to give up on the world. I refuse to cease existence completely. I will live on, in my children, in the hope that someday they will succeed, or their children's children. And I understand if you find that hard to accept or believe. To be honest, I do too, but I want to live in a world where I can feel this way, and hopefully someday I will. It's better to fight for what you believe in than to lose your ability to choose, to be stuck in a world where your only actions are sanctioned by those in power to walk and to cook. These stories are beautiful revolutions, sparks of hope and rage in the face of chaos. If they inspire you, take part in your community. Stand up for what you believe in. I won't pretend a YouTube video is the beginnings of change, no one thing is, but people are. Not a person, but people. And if you find this inspiring, play these games. Let them inspire you further. You still have a voice, and some of these characters have lost theirs. So use your voice to try to make a world you want to exist. and don't wait for others to make it. They will often disappoint you. Resources below on ways to resist and participate in communities that aren't just voting or protesting, which I will admit are lifted from FD Signifier. Y'all should watch his stuff as well. Be safe, be smart. Try these games out because they're all beautiful, each in different ways. And again, fight to live in the world you want to live in.
I regret leaving.
Hey, that's your drunk talking.
I regret all that mess we left behind. What was the point? Fighting for freedom? The 5 demands? It was a mistake.
You know that's not true.
All it did was expedite the end. Brought their fists down harder, faster.
Come on, Clara.
We lost, didn't we?
It wasn't just about winning.
What? What was it about then?
You remember? In the streets? Hundreds of thousands marching shoulder to shoulder. Biggest demonstrations in HK history. The world watched it all happen. Heard our voices. Saw us bleed.
So?
So? If we stayed silent, didn't stand up for ourselves, they would say, this is how it always was. They would say, this is what the people wanted. But no, they can't say that, because it has gone down in history that we resisted fiercely. That we fought for a different future until we couldn't. That legacy lives in us.
Dies with us too.
Yes, but it lives on in Iris.
Wherever she is.
Wherever she is.
You believe all that?
Of course. It's what you told me.
Then I guess I believe it too.